RCR TV, I'm Sean Kinney, and we're joined in our Austin, Texas production studio by Kevin Fitchard, formerly of Giga Om. Kevin, you're in town for South by Southwest, and you're on a panel today. It's the end of the internet as we know it. So that's an exciting title. What's the panel going to be about?
It's a rather ominous sounding title, isn't it? Well, basically, we're kind of exploring some of the new technologies that are kind of expanding access and the scope of the internet kind of all over the world. And it's called that way because the panelists who I'll get to in a second are kind of exploring some pretty interesting things that are kind of outside the scope of the internet as we traditionally know it. Things like drones and balloons and satellite connectivity. Creating community networks and remote villages. And also just by making a certain aspect of the internet free in order to encourage people who wouldn't normally be able to afford to get on the internet, onto the internet. The panelists it's a pretty interesting group. It's Misha Ben-Alil. He's the CEO of Open Garden, which is you might know them for they created an app called Fire Chat, which is used in the Hong Kong protests and in Taiwan as a kind of off-grid communications where people were afraid that the government would basically shut down access to communications. People literally link their phones directly to each other through peer-to-peer networks in order to communicate. We have Chris Wessler, who's the head of Facebook's Internet.org initiative. Internet.org is actually a multi kind of vendor initiative, but Mark Zuckerberg was kind of the brainchild behind it in the first place. And he'll be talking a little bit about Internet.org's kind of effort to kind of connect more people in countries like in Africa and Southeast Asia by basically offering free access to Facebook and other apps like Wikipedia at zero rated, absolutely no cost. Finally, Gautam Chanda from sorry Gautam if I butchered your name, from Opera, who will be talking about Opera's browser technology and how that's being used to kind of make the internet more accessible in many ways. And we're going to be talking a little bit about technology and a little bit about those companies themselves, but I think we're going to explore some larger philosophical issues, like whether or not the internet today is really doing what the internet promised to be. I can, pardon me.
Hey, live TV, ladies and gentlemen.
That's not working. Is the fact that billions of people are not connected today a fault of the internet itself? If we could start all over, should the internet have been designed differently? Or are these new technologies just what it takes to kind of fill in the gaps at the edges that will kind of bring those final billions connected kind of online and on the web and stuff?
Yeah, that's a really broad, interesting topic. You mentioned there are a lot of philosophical kind of inroads you could make, and in terms of access, I think obviously net neutrality and some of the recent regulations we've seen out of Washington D.C. have a lot of implications towards the future of the internet. So, how do you see that? Is it the responsibility of the abstract internet to do anything in particular, or is it the responsibility of these various public-private entities that have the controls?
The internet ultimately is just a tool, but it should be a tool. It should be accessible to as many people as possible. I think these companies and a lot of really smart people in Silicon Valley and in the mobile industry are trying to figure out how to use that internet or how to make a better tool to connect people and stuff. But you bring up net neutrality, and that's a very, very interesting case because a lot of these tools that people are using kind of go against what the principles of internet neutrality that were kind of laid out in the new FCC guidelines. And it's odd because it might put some of these companies in a particular space like Google or Facebook or companies like Opera that are promoting zero-rated apps, because here in the U.S. we value this concept of net neutrality where nothing should be discriminated against. The pipe is open and we should be free. There should be no impediment or no encouragement to use one app versus another. And that's a great guideline. But if you're in a country that has 5% internet penetration, and all of a sudden an organization comes along and says, "I'll give you free access to Facebook, I'll give you free access to Google, but just these particular apps," and that will encourage millions of your users who never use the internet on a mobile phone or a PC to actually go online. You take that deal, right? But that kind of program would probably be banned under the net neutrality rules because it favors one application versus another, one service versus another. It's kind of a form of internet discrimination. So what is the greater good, so to speak? Is it, philosophically, is it to connect as many people as possible, even if it is to specific apps, or is it to preserve that that principle of absolute neutrality and then just let it unfold without any kind of additional encouragement. So.
And you mentioned some of these projects that are using basically retrofitted weather balloons to try to provide internet in really inaccessible places where sort of terrestrial-based infrastructure would be a big challenge. I think the Google iteration is called Project Loon.
Mm-hmm.
So when they're making these huge investments in these projects to try to open up markets that have no internet access, is it a goodwill gesture or is there a business line that's buried in there somewhere?
I'm sure there always is a business line, in there. I mean, I kind of, I look at projects like Loon and aspects of internet.org, like they have drone and satellite experiments. Almost, there's kind of an analog to the telecom industry under the monopoly days. I'm not saying monopoly was a good thing, but under monopoly, AT&T did some pretty incredible things, like under Bell Labs. Some amazing research projects and that kind of thing, and they kind of had the freedom to do that, knowing that they might not be profitable for the company in the long run. And I think that Google, having the resources that it does is kind of taking that kind of line now today, that this could be a grand project that could eventually help connect billions of people in the world, or it could just fizzle out. But
right.
If those billions of people do get connected, they will also be connected to Google services, which obviously is a benefit towards Google. Same goes for Facebook. Same goes for any organization that's looking into these things. But I do get the impression they're very much experimental. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg was just at Mobile World Congress, and you guys were there too. I think you covered his talk as well. He was very much downplaying the idea of drones, and not downplaying, but focusing more on the mobile network. He was obviously talking to an audience of carriers and that kind of thing. But I think a lot of people focused on the kind of drones and lasers, space-based lasers, and that because it's the exciting, sexy kind of stuff.
It's cool.
But yeah, it's fun to talk about too. But people are pretty focused on like wireless networks. I think one of the core focuses right now is not that there are places where the infrastructure is actually in place, but people just cannot access it because they cannot afford to. So.
Well, it sounds like a really exciting panel, Kevin. We appreciate you spending some time with RCR during South by Southwest.
Yeah, I want to encourage anybody to come see it. It's at 5 p.m. at the Hyatt today here in Austin. So.
There you go, 5 p.m. They're going to solve what the future of the internet is.
Yes,
right?
we're going to solve the problem today at 5 p.m. Be there. So.